The sapphire on her left hand caught the sterile overhead light of the hospital corridor, fracturing it into a dozen cold blue spears. Anya stared at it, not with the joy that had flooded her 6 months ago when David slid it onto her finger in the soft candlelight of Luigi's, but with a kind of detached curiosity. It was a beautiful trap, a promise, a weight that now seemed to anchor her to the polished linoleum floor as she walked, her sensible flats making no sound. She was delivering patient charts to the surgical ward, a mundane task for a nurse of her experience, but she'd volunteered for it. The oncology ward, her domain, was too heavy today. It was filled with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken goodbyes, a mirror to the quiet death occurring within her own chest. David was a good man. The words played on a loop in her mind, a mantra she used to beat back the guilt. David was a surgeon, brilliant and steady. He saved lives with hands that were always calm, always certain. He loved her with the same methodical precision. He remembered her allergy to penicillin, brought her tea exactly at 10 p.m. during her night shifts, and had already drafted color-coded spreadsheets for their wedding next spring. Her mother called him a catch. Her friends sighed with enviable approval. Anya felt like she was living inside a perfectly curated, tastefully beige museum exhibit. Life with David, the plaque would read, safe, secure, and sanitized. The affair didn't start with a bang, but with a whisper of rain against a window. It was 3 months ago, during a rare July downpour that flooded the city streets. Her car, a reliable Toyota, had sputtered and died in the middle of Elm Street. Panicked, soaked to the skin in her pale blue scrubs, she'd called David. His phone went straight to voicemail, a complicated hours-long surgery, she knew. As she stood under the awning of a closed bookstore, shivering, a beat-up silver Jeep pulled over. The passenger window rolled down. "You look like a drowned kitten. Need a lift to the vet?" The voice was laced with a warmth that cut through the chill. That was Leo. Not Leonardo, just Leo. He owned the bookstore, the last chapter, and had been closing up when he saw her. He had unruly dark hair dusted with premature gray, eyes the color of weathered denim, and a smile that seemed to genuinely reach them, creating a web of fine lines. He didn't look like David. David was all clean lines and sharp angles. Leo was comfortably rumpled. He smelled of old paper, rain, and faintly of bergamot. He drove her home, not saying much, just playing a folk album she didn't know on a crackling stereo. The silence wasn't awkward, it was spacious. When they pulled up to her and David's modern apartment building, a glass and steel monolith, he simply said, "This looks serious." "It is," she'd replied, her thumb instinctively rubbing the sapphire. She offered him money for his trouble. He laughed, a soft, rich sound. "Just buy a book someday, preferably from me." He handed her a slightly damp business card. Leo Walsh, proprietor, reader of fortunes, in books only. She tucked it into her purse, a secret little rectangle of texture in a world of digital smoothness. She didn't mention him to David. There was nothing to mention, she told herself. Just a kind stranger. But the following Thursday, her day off, she found herself walking past the polished corporate chain bookstore in the mall and driving across town to Elm Street. The last chapter was a narrow, cluttered space that seemed to lean slightly, its windows filled with haphazard stacks of books and a lazy tabby cat. A bell tinkled when she entered. The air was thick with the scent of aging paper, binding glue, and lemon wood polish. Leo looked up from behind an ancient oak counter, peering over a copy of Steinbeck's East of Eden. Recognition and something like quiet delight flickered in his eyes. "The drowned kitten. You lived." "I bought a new battery," Anya said, feeling strangely shy. "And I'm here to buy a book. For the lift." "Ah, discharging your debt. Practical." He put the book down and came out from behind the counter. He wore jeans with a small hole in one knee and a faded Radiohead t-shirt. "What's your poison? Escapism? Existential dread? Romantic trifles?" "What would you recommend?" she asked, genuinely curious. He studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful, not appraising. "You have careful eyes, like you're always assessing, managing, holding things together. I think you need something untidy, something that bleeds a little." He walked to a shelf, his fingers trailing over spines with a lover's familiarity, and pulled out a worn copy of The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Kundera. This, it's about choices and weight and the terrible freedom of it all. She bought it. She went back the next week under the pretext of needing something new, and he handed her Stoner by John Williams. For when you feel invisible in your own life, he said, his voice gentle. The words struck a chord so deep it vibrated in her bones. The conversations began slowly, orbiting the books at first. Then they expanded, filling the quiet space of the shop on slow afternoons. He told her about leaving a corporate marketing job a decade ago to chase this foolish dream. He spoke of his ex-wife, a painter who'd left for Berlin, with a wistfulness that held no bitterness. He talked about music, about the best coffee in the city, a tiny Vietnamese place run by two elderly sisters, about the ache of missing his daughter, who lived with her mother most of the year. Anya found herself talking in a way she never did with David. With David, conversations were about plans, facts, logistics. With Leo, she spoke of the haunting silence after a patient passed, of her childhood dream to be a marine biologist, of her fear that she was becoming a background character in her own story. He listened, truly listened, his whole body turned towards her, as if her words were the most important text he'd ever decipher. The first touch was an accident. She was reaching for a book on a high shelf, and he was beside her, his hand brushing hers as he helped. A simple, static shock. They both flinched, but their eyes locked, and the air in the dusty aisle became charged, thick. She pulled her hand away as if burned, her heart hammering against her ribs. She made an excuse and left, the unread book forgotten on a table. For a week she fought it. She was engaged. She loved David. She threw herself into wedding planning, choosing between ivory and eggshell for the napkins, tasting cakes that all seemed to turn to ash in her mouth. David, sensing her distraction, attributed it to work stress. You give too much of yourself to those patients, Anya, he said, kissing her forehead. You need to preserve your emotional resources. He suggested a spa weekend. It sounded like a sentence. She broke before the week was out. She told David she was meeting an old nursing school friend for dinner. The lie tasted metallic on her tongue. She drove to Elm Street, her hands shaking on the wheel. The shop was closed, but the light was on in the upstairs apartment. She stood on the wet sidewalk, the rain beginning again, a faint mist. She didn't have to call. He appeared at the door, holding a mug, as if he'd been waiting. He didn't smile. He just opened the door wider. She climbed the narrow stairs to a cozy, book-filled living space. No words were needed. The space between them, so carefully maintained for weeks, collapsed. When he kissed her, it was nothing like David's precise, affectionate kisses. It was a question and an answer, a wildfire in the rain. It was desperate and hungry, a collision of two lonely planets breaking their ordained orbits. It felt less like sin and more like salvation, a terrifying and glorious freefall. After lying in the tangle of his sheets amidst piles of books, listening to the rain and the low hum of a Miles Davis record, the guilt descended like a shroud. It sat on her chest, heavy and cold. She cried silent, wrenching tears. Leo didn't offer empty platitudes. He just held her, his chin resting on her head, his arms a solid band around her. I know, he whispered into her hair. I know. That was the pattern. A stolen afternoon a week, sometimes two. She became a master of lies. Double shift. Book club. Helping my mom. David, immersed in his own demanding world, never questioned. He trusted her. That trust became another weight, another lash of the guilt that both tortured and, perversely, fueled her. The duality split her life into stark panels. The bright, ordered, sanitized world of David, the hospital, the wedding planner's binders, and the dim, messy, profoundly alive world of Leo's apartment, where time felt elastic and real. With Leo, she rediscovered her body not as a functional vessel, but as a source of pleasure and connection. She laughed louder. She argued about philosophy and music. She ate takeout straight from the container on the floor. She felt seen, not for her efficiency or her nurturing calm, but for her messy, passionate, uncertain self. He called her Anya, her full name, with a gravity that made it sound like a secret. One afternoon in October, the air crisp and golden, the dam broke. They were in his apartment, and she was looking at a photograph on his bookshelf, a younger Leo, arm around a laughing girl with braces and wild curls. Your daughter? She asked. Mira, he said, a softness in his voice. She's 12. She thinks my bookstore is quaintly obsolete. He came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his head on her shoulder. Stay tonight. The request hung in the air. She never stayed the night. She always left before dusk, returning to David, to her curated life. I can't, she said automatically, her body tensing. Why? His voice was quiet, but it held an edge she hadn't heard before. Tell him. Tell him you've fallen in love with someone else. End it. The word love was a detonation. They had never said it. Their thing was a palpable, electric current, but they'd carefully avoided naming it. To name it was to make it real, to force a choice. It's not that simple, Leo, she said, pulling away. It is, he insisted, turning her to face him. His denim eyes were stormy. This half-life is killing us. You're lying to him, and you're lying to yourself. What are you so afraid of losing? The perfect apartment? The country club membership? The napkin colors? His words were a scalpel, sharp and precise, cutting to the truth she refused to face. You don't understand, she shot back, tears of anger and shame springing to her eyes. David is a good man. He doesn't deserve this. I don't deserve to just walk away from that into some bohemian fantasy. Is that what this is to you? He asked, his voice dropping to a wounded whisper. A fantasy? An escape from your perfect cage? Isn't it? She challenged, the guilt morphing into a defensive, vicious fury. You have your books and your ideals and no real responsibilities. You live in a world of stories. I live in the real one, with real consequences. The silence that followed was glacial. He looked at her as if seeing a stranger. The connection that had hummed between them for months snapped. He took a step back, the distance between them suddenly insurmountable. You should go, he said flatly, turning towards the window. She fled, the taste of their fight bitter in her mouth. For 2 weeks, she didn't go to the bookstore. She tried to be the perfect fiancé. She finalized the caterer. She picked out her wedding dress, a sleek, elegant gown that made her look like a stranger. She slept beside David, the ghost of Leo's touch a phantom pain on her skin. The guilt was now a constant companion, a cold stone in her gut. She missed Leo with a physical ache that terrified her, but her pride and her fear kept her away. Then on a gray November morning, a patient in her ward, a gentle old man named Mr. Henderson who loved poetry, passed away. His wife, a small bird-like woman, held his hand until the end, then turned to Anya, her eyes dry and ancient with grief. We had 53 years, she said, her voice paper-thin. It was messy and hard and so beautiful. Don't waste your one wild life on neatness, dear. The words shattered Anya's fragile resolve. She knew with a terrifying absolute clarity what she had to do. She loved Leo. She was in love with him. The life with David was a beautifully rendered portrait, but she was not the woman in it. She had to end the engagement. It would be brutal, unfair, the worst thing she would ever do to a good man, but continuing the lie was worse. She drove to Elm Street, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. She would tell Leo she was choosing him. She would end things with David tonight. She would face the devastation. The closed sign was on the door of the last chapter. It was a Tuesday. He should be open. A cold trickle of dread traced her spine. She peered through the window. The shop was dark, more empty than usual. Many of the shelves were bare. She saw a movement inside and knocked frantically. The door was opened by a woman about her age with kind eyes and a tired smile. Can I help you? I'm looking for Leo, Anya said, her voice trembling. Oh, the woman said, her expression softening with sympathy. You're a friend? He didn't tell many people. He had to leave suddenly. His ex-wife was in a bad accident in Berlin. He's gone to be with Mira to help take care of things. He's not coming back. He sold the shop to me last week. I'm just clearing out the last of his personal things. The world tilted. The sounds of the street faded into a dull roar. Not coming back? The words were alien. It's a terrible situation, the woman said. He was devastated. He loved this place, but family, you know? Family. The word was a final, elegant lock on the cage door. Anya managed to nod, to mutter some thanks, to stumble back to her car. She sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, watching the gray November light leach the color from the world. He was gone. He had made his choice. For his daughter, for his past. He had chosen the real over the fantasy, just as she had been too cowardly to do, and he hadn't even called. He had just vanished from the narrative of her life. That night, David came home to find her sitting on the floor of their pristine living room, still in her coat, the engagement ring on the glass coffee table between them. Her face was blotchy from hours of silent weeping. "Anya, what's wrong?" He rushed to her side, his surgeon's hands reaching for her, then stopping, sensing a different kind of trauma. She told him, all of it. The rain, the bookstore, the books, the afternoons, the fight, the love. The words fell like stones into the quiet room. She didn't spare herself. She painted herself as the villain, the betrayer, the coward. She needed him to hate her, for it would be easier than the look that slowly dawned on his face. Not just hurt, but a profound, world-shattering disillusionment. She had broken the one thing he valued most, certainty. When she finished, the silence was absolute. He stood up, walked to the window, his back to her. His shoulders, usually so square and sure, were slumped. "Get out," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Take your things and go. I never want to see you again." Nashono. There was no shouting, no drama, just a clean surgical excision. She was the malignancy, and he was cutting her out. She moved into a small, furnished apartment near the hospital. The wedding was canceled. The mutual friends chose sides, most gravitating towards David, the wronged party. Her parents were horrified, her mother's disappointment a palpable chill over the phone. Anya worked double shifts, losing herself in the tangible suffering of others, which was somehow easier to bear than her own. Months bled into a year. She heard through the grapevine that David was seeing a pediatrician. She hoped, with a grief that was now a dull, chronic ache, that he was happy. She thought of Leo every day. The memory was no longer a source of passion, but of a profound lesson in loss and consequence. She had wanted both lives, and in her indecision, she had lost them both. She had traded a real, if imperfect, love for a passionate escape, and in the end, the escape had no foundation. It was a chapter, not a whole story. One rainy afternoon, over a year later, she found herself on Elm Street. The bookstore was now a trendy boutique selling scented candles and artisanal ceramics. The old sign was gone. She stood where her car had died, where his Jeep had pulled over. The rain felt the same. She finally understood the unbearable lightness Akundra wrote about. Her life was now light, unanchored. She had no promises to keep, no future mapped out. It was terrifying. It was also, for the first time, truly her own. The guilt and the grief had scoured her clean. She was Anya, just Anya, a nurse who had made a catastrophic error and had to learn to live in the ruins. She didn't buy a candle. She turned and walked back to her small, quiet apartment, alone. The phantom weight of the sapphire was gone from her finger. All that remained was the memory of its cold blue light and the echo of two loves lost, one to her betrayal, the other to her fear. She had chosen in the end by not choosing. And the story, though brutally ended, was finally irrevocably true.